So I guess we'll get started now. And welcome to On the Park Bench, a public square conversation brought to you by the Congress for the New Urbanism. On the Park Bench presents interactive conversations with thought leaders in new urbanism and allied fields related to the built environment. Today we have Empty to Energized, Creative Storefront Revival with Rick Adamski, Evan Snow, and Andrew Martineau, moderated by myself, Robert Studeville. So share your thoughts on hashtag on the park bench, www.tinyurl.com/OTPB feedback. And join us for the upcoming webinar next week and on wildfire recovery and planning, which is going to take place Tuesday, March 4th from 12 noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And register for CNU 33. CNU 33 is going to be in Providence, Rhode Island on June 11th through 14th, 2025. This historic port city has stunning architecture and some of the best new urbanism in the U.S. Go to cnu.org/CNU33 to check out the fantastic program. And today we're going to talk about how to tackle the problem of empty storefronts, which is the bane of main streets and downtowns all across America in the wake of COVID and technological changes that are ravaging in-person retail. Rick Adamski is president of Ash and Lime, a Dallas-based downtown and neighborhood planning firm that has worked in over 30 towns and cities of various types and sizes. In August 2024, he co-founded the Storefront Renaissance League, a national initiative dedicated to revitalizing vacant and underutilized storefronts through design improvements, small business support, policy strategies, and community-driven development. Rick is a longtime member of the New Urbanist and Strongtown movements. Evan Snow is co-founder of Zero Empty Spaces, an arts advocate and creative placemaker. He has helped to transform over 32 formerly vacant spaces across 4 states, welcoming more than 700 artists into affordable studios that foster creativity, collaboration, and economic revitalization. He is a passionate arts advocate, community builder, and creative placemaker dedicated to activating vacant commercial real estate spaces into thriving hubs for artists and local communities. Andrew Martineau is a visionary creative professional with over 30 years of experience in advertising, marketing, and design, renowned for his innovative approach to marketing and placemaking. He is the co-founder of Zero Empty Spaces and the founder and CEO of Unitas Group, which manages a portfolio of ventures in the arts and placemaking. I'm Rob Studeville, editor of CNU's Public Square. And first, there's going to be a presentation by the panel, and then a discussion among the panel, and then we will open it up for questions from the audience. So please use the Q&A function of Zoom to ask your questions as they occur to you. So welcome Rick, Evan, and Andrew to On the Park Bench, and I'm going to stop my share and let Rick take over.
Thank you.
And we'll start this.
Well, thank you. I'm so happy to be here and again, and so happy to be talking to you with Evan and Andrew, who I have a lot of respect for the work that they do, and I think that for those of you who might not be familiar with them, will be very excited when you see what they're doing. What I want to talk about a little bit about myself and a little bit about the league, but more importantly, to kind of break down some of the key steps that we are thinking about when we're thinking about going into a downtown or a district and how to revitalize their storefronts and how to bring the league into it. And these are just some of the basics. There's a lot more to it, but I think that this can help to think about a framework for how to look at things. And of course, every place is different, as we know. But I think that this might be a helpful way to look at it, and then I'll pass it on to Evan and Andrew after I'm done here. And let's see here. Okay, cool. So about me very briefly, I have my master's degree in urban planning. Before I started my company, Ash and Lime, I worked in Chicago for American Planning Association, Congress for the New Urbanism, Center for Neighborhood Technology in the city of Fort Worth. And I have been very active in the strong
Rick,
towns.
we're not yet seeing your presentation.
What did you say?
We're not
We're
yet
not seeing it. Oh, okay.
seeing your directory.
How's that?
That's better.
Okay, good. All right.
We're still,
So
they could,
Uh, my firm has been around for 11 years. Rob talked a little bit about it, but our name is based on the ingredients of Roman concrete. So the idea of this is simple ingredients that have stood the test of time in creating great places. Sometimes we might be a little more clever than we need to be in some ways, and we have to make sure that we're getting the simple and timeless things right and focusing on those first. Throughout the last 11 plus years, storefronts have always been at the heart of our work. These are examples of pop-up things that we did that became permanent businesses in storefronts. But working into the downtown and neighborhood level, we're in constant contact with storefronts. But we saw that we needed to bring in more people who had other tools in order to focus on this one issue and be as effective as we could be.
excuse me, Rick, could you make that full screen?
Yes, I can. Hold on. Not used to working with the PDFs here, but let's see. Da, da, da.
Bottom right.
Yes. What'd you say?
Bottom right.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Is that better?
Uh,
One up. The third from the bottom.
Sorry. Up here?
I think that should do it.
Okay. Mm, full screen mode. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so we have a lot of different people who are experts in different things. Storefronts, planning, small business support and design and development. Some of you know Jaime Azureta, who I presented with on third places previously here. We also have Evan and Andrew who are going to talk to you. We have some people who are in smarts business development, who are small business supporters, crowdfunders, as well as a lot of other people who are on our network as needed. So there's people who we can pull in, for example, for things like incremental development, small scale manufacturing. We have a really robust network around the country. Storefronts are really important, we think, because it's kind of where the public and the private realm connect. So it's where you can make the most difference as one person. It's the smallest unit of neighborhood revitalization, and it's kind of home to the mom and pop businesses, which are the soul of the community. We've always operated under, if anyone's familiar with the 80-20 rule, find the small number of investments that can get 80% of the improvements. The idea of this is by focusing on storefronts, we can help communities if resources might be uncertain as they are right now. If they might need to really, have modest budgets and they need to do as much as possible. We feel like the storefronts are a place to start, and we feel like we're bringing in the people who have the best expertise. So this is from a project that we did in Corsicana, Texas recently. Um, you know, why? The underperforming, unattractive storefronts are a great reason why downtowns and neighborhoods aren't reaching their level. But we need kind of a lot of different types of tools to bring this in. So these are the best specialists that we know of from various fields around the country, but also people who can work small, people who can work in smaller towns if needed, and with an idea of that you're the experts in your own community. So if we don't have local champions, then the league can't succeed. We can't just sweep in and do things ourselves. So to kind of break down the way that we're looking at the various steps of this, quite simply, the first step is to create and update a storefront inventory. Most of the communities that we've worked with or talked to have some sort of GIS data or some sort of spreadsheet that has basic information about their storefronts in their downtown or whatever the district is. But really figuring out, trying to get building to building and figure out what you have. And I think the most important thing, all of the objective of all of this is to say what are the situations so that we can figure out where the opportunities are and what the barriers are. So we can get very complex and complicated into this, but the bottom line is pretty simple. Assessing what you have in terms of the big picture. What's the vacancy rate? What type of uses do we have? And I learned to do this storefront quality ranking. So ranking storefronts to where they are, and then figuring out what are the lease prices and what investments are needed. By doing this process, in some cases, you may figure out, hey, our downtown, for example, is mostly really strong. we have a couple of vacancies and we may need to do some tweaks. In other cases, you might say the market is not going to naturally fill this in the foreseeable future. We need to pick our battles. We need to find a couple of storefronts and figure out what type of resources are needed. So you're trying to do an assessment, and the idea is that one size does not fit all. So understanding current conditions, assessing barriers, and figuring out how much city support and subsidies you need. There are places where you just need a little bit of a stick and say, hey, we're gonna penalize you if you keep not, having stuff up to code, or if this keeps being vacant. So let's just either sell it or fix it up. In other cases, you might have something where the market is not that strong. We've worked in places where we see the need to really ratchet things up. And then to me, the next thing is opportunity sites. And an opportunity site is not one type of thing. It could be vacant and it's ready for a CO. So, hey, this is an empty site. This is a low hanging fruit. We can do something here. If we can't do something permanent, maybe we can do a pop up. In some cases, you might need to really say, okay, this storefront is too large. We need some incremental development support to really come in and figure out some creative ways to reuse this. We might need to re-subdivide it. It might be that it's occupied, but hey, this is the best corner on Main Street, and we have an optometrist office here. Can we figure out ways to rearrange things or to move things around so that we can come up with more active uses? In some cases, there may be active and successful. In some cases, maybe it's like, hey, these are going to be vacant for a while, but can we do window displays that make it look good, maybe during the day, maybe at night? So figuring out what your opportunities are. And the reality, of course, is that if you have a property owner who doesn't want to work with you, and most downtowns do, or they're just, they're not going to do anything with their property, that may look like the best opportunity, but in our experience, it's not the best opportunity. The best opportunity is one where people are ready to do something. And then reviewing policies. How is our code enforcement helping or not helping us? What about our building codes? Can we do temporary COs? A lot of times we've tried to do pop-up programs, but you can't really, the COs are hard to do for that. How is red tape getting in the way? I've had a client who I've worked with that everybody said we'd love to do something downtown, but it's just too much bureaucracy, and we don't really understand the entitlement process, so we need help with that. Is your zoning hurting you? Facade grants and window display programs, all of that sort of things. Your signage, your small business support network, which can be a huge thing, right? How are you actually incubating things so that maybe someone who can't take out a 5-year lease or a 10-year lease and isn't a national credit tenant, how are you lowering the barrier to entry for them and supporting them? Your district-wide funding, organizational support. In some cases, I've had projects where I've had to actually work with the Main Street organization to, in some cases, even create a Main Street organization because you need someone on the ground. And then, do we need support for large capital improvements? If someone's like, hey, we've got asbestos here, or our roof's going to fall in, or there's no way we're going to be able to get, the ADA to get the second floor occupied, someone may need to come in with some real money. And then the next step is to take the next steps depending on the need. So do you need to create a small business incubation system? Do you need incremental development support where you go and find the people who are locals who can fix some of these places up? Site specific pro formas, meaning that do we need to look at a particular building and figure out ways that it can be creatively reformulated or restructured in order to make something happen? Code enforcement, pop-up retail, and sometimes just site-specific designs. There's this particular, so you want to think on the scale of an individual site as well as on the scale of the whole. So just a couple of examples of things that we did. There's a lot of different things to do, but just these are concepts that we're recommending that are I believe going to be implemented. One of these is a really simple concept, right? You have an existing business, this Mow the Tailor. It's wonderful. But the outside does not look wonderful. It needs TLC and it needs a little bit of an upgrade. So this is a simple type of thing. In other cases, this is a vacant building in Corsicana, Texas, which is our recent client, which was the first place west of the Mississippi where oil was discovered. So kind of the heart of the Texas oil industry at one point. So having a more kind of creative design for that. In other cases, it may be that you have to do something a little bit heavier surgery and say, okay, how do we take a site, how do we take a building and subdivide it into different parts that we can do that? So I don't want to take up too much of your time because we have others who want to speak. But if you have any questions, you're welcome to follow up. And I know the video of the presentation is going to be shared as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Rick. So my name is Evan Snow, and along with my business partner, Andrew Martineau, who's on the line, we started an initiative called Zero Empty Spaces to activate vacant commercial real estate spaces to create affordable working artist studios. So artists have space to create and collaborate affordably outside their homes, which through the first 32 spaces we've activated over the last 5 years across 4 states, has created incredible amount of win-win-win opportunities for all parties involved, beyond the 700 artists we've supported, in terms of being able to increase, obviously, leasing activity for our commercial real estate partners, supporting walkability of the shopping centers, the malls, the office buildings, where we are activated to support the neighboring tenants, reducing blight, mitigating maintenance issues before they become, wider spread, as property managers generally are only going in periodically to monitor the empty spaces. We have artists working in the space daily to be able to help us mitigate those and be able to help catch them before they spread. We make it super easy, serving as one point of contact for property owners and one point of contact for the artists. For property owners, we assume all liability for the space. We provide our own insurance. We take care of the utilities, the HVAC maintenance. We put up our own signage. We take care of the permitting. We also own and operate an agency, so we do our own public relations, social media, marketing internally. And it's kind of like the gift that keeps on giving. Once we activate the space and the artists start moving in, obviously you can see they start adding their artwork to the walls and bringing life to a formerly vacant space. And that's when the magic starts to happen, that these spaces begin to become thriving creative placemaking hubs for classes, workshops, nonprofit fundraisers. We didn't get into this to make the most amount of money possible. We got into this to solve a problem. As we live in South Florida, one of the least affordable counties for housing, we thought to ourselves, seeing all these for lease signs, what if we can make this one of the most affordable spaces for artists to create in? And thankfully, my business partner, Andrew, is a former marketing executive with the Westfield Corporation, where he had developed vacancy management strategies and solutions for malls and shopping centers, and various types of retail spaces to be able to not only attract shoppers, but keep feet in the street, create more economic impact opportunities, create more positive press coverage and buzz, social media content. And this is, part of our mission. This is the work that we really enjoy doing, is taking these underutilized spaces to support not just emerging, but also mid-career, and established artists as well. Because for most artists or creatives, one of the biggest barriers to getting out of their home is the affordability to rent an entire retail space, which isn't very practical, signing a 1, 5, or 10-year lease. So we take these large spaces and subdivide them into smaller spaces. We make them available to artists on a month-to-month basis, so there's that flexibility. If their situation changes, there's no, there's no big impact to them financially. They could end with no benefit, with no penalty. And also for the properties, we're operating on a month-to-month basis until they get a permanent tenant, while the property stays listed on LoopNet, on the market, with the for lease sign in the window. This understandably serves a great benefit for chronic vacancies, but also we're working more with mixed-use developers who are required to build ground floor retail space as part of their new development programs, projects, and also for office buildings. Whereas I'm sure everybody on this call is familiar with the situation with office spaces, we're going in and providing an additional amenity of sorts, helping not only increase leasing activity for the office partners that we support. If you have a prospective tenant looking at 2 buildings, one of them has a cafe and a gym, one of them has a cafe, gym, and an art space, we're also providing wellness in the workplace opportunities with workshops to help reduce stress and burnout, to help engage and retain tenants and employees in these office buildings that we support. And it's, super straightforward, super simple. We activate these spaces on a $0 month-to-month lease basis while they're not generating anybody any revenue or doing anybody any good. We do ask for a minimum of a 6-month guarantee for locations outside of Florida, where we bear additional expenses for travel, operations, and logistics. But we do everything. We serve as one point of contact, and we return the space back to the condition that we found it in and provide the certificate of insurance to back it up. We've been in every cross-section of commercial real estate, from street-level retail to malls to office to pad sites, Payless shoe stores, former banks, whatever the case may be, as long as it preferably has working HVAC, running water, and a functional electrical panel. We'll assess the space, see what upgrades are needed. If it needs a fire exit sign to help bring it up to code, we'll add a fire exit sign, recertify fire extinguishers, add lighting as needed. It's a pretty simple process. However, at the end of the day, we just need to get connected to interested property owners and developers that are amenable and open to the concept. So we speak to a lot of business improvement districts, community redevelopment agencies, downtown development authorities, economic development offices, and main streets, who understandably are tasked with, fixing or filling the vacancies that plague their main street or their community or their district. And then once we get into conversation with the potential owner or developer, we let them know about the program, answer any questions, review their certificate of insurance requirements, and their either lease or licensing agreement, whatever the case may be. We'll come for a site visit where not only do we meet our property partners, but we also spend time meeting local stakeholders within the city, within the arts organizations and local artists. We understand that oftentimes we're coming from outside the community, so we want to let the community know what we're coming to provide as resources without taking commission off the artists for their sales, without taking grants and taking from the small funding pool. We self-fund this ourselves, and we don't require the funding. We're obviously open to and prioritizing locations that do have incentives and grant programs to help with reactivating vacant spaces. And then once we establish an agreement, we'll provide a COI. We'll start submitting for our certificate of occupancy and business tax receipt. We'll schedule that trip in alignment with the city's permitting process, 4 to 8 weeks out, depending on the municipality. And then we'll schedule an open house preview and information session for interested artists in the community, where we invite the press, the artists, the arts organizations to see the space after we came and build it out, and hear from us, answer any questions. We can do a 3,000 square foot space in about 3 days. We generally come in on a Wednesday, have our materials delivered, build it out, and have it done by Friday, with the open house preview being on Saturday. We have developed and adapted a lot of the placemaking methodologies for lighter, faster, cheaper. So we don't adhere the divider walls to the physical walls. We make them movable like furniture to alleviate some of the architectural rendering and requirements from the city. And then once the artists start moving in that following week, that's when the magic happens. We'll then schedule a subsequent grand opening reception, where you saw examples from the initial video that I sent, with photo and video recaps. And we do this all at on our cost. Our agency handles this internally. Just another perk and benefit that we provide to our property partners. We obviously know closed doors don't generate positive press, and a lot of our shopping center clients have let their agencies go during the pandemic. So we're able to help provide on average 4 press hits between TV, newspaper, magazine, and beyond per location that we open on average. And the press has been very generous to us, and that certainly helped us grow the mission. And then we love just having the spaces serve as these placemaking hubs for potlucks and all the other events that I mentioned that obviously bring exposure and opportunity to the artists. We're very proud about the impact that we've been able to create over the last 5 years. We have been able to help generate for the artists over $1.4 million in sales. And as some of you might be aware, every dollar spent in the arts has a 9-to-1 return in terms of supporting the creative economy and the cities that they serve. The artists are able to go to the art supply store, continue paying their rent, continue paying their taxes. So we love being able to support them in doing so, and supporting our property partners in cities. We've also established some other programs where we are providing art leasing for people in offices and condo buildings and various uses that might not want to purchase the art. We have flexible programs where they can support local artists. The artists retain ownership of the work, and we rotate art on a 3, 6, or 12-month basis to help generate more economic impact while spreading local art into communities, something we're very proud and passionate about. And then with the Storefront Renaissance League, we're also undergoing vacancy advisory. So either between our zero empty spaces concept, or we know there's a lot of cities now that are adopting their own, vacant to vibrant type of programs or storefront, reinvigoration programs. A lot of times these cities are coming to us first because we've developed technology to handle the scheduling, the accountability, the checking in. We've developed frameworks for the operating manuals and procedures for the spaces. And then we've also, throughout our agency, come up with signature art weeks and art festivals and other signature festivals and weeks that could provide additional benefit and marketing opportunities for the communities that we serve beyond just activating the vacant spaces to provide that economic revitalization. And we always are just really proud to share some of the nonprofit collaborations that have come as a result of the vacant spaces. Most notably, and these are able to be duplicated and replicated in other cities. We had one of our locations partner with the local symphony to receive instruments that were unable to be played any longer, and the artists were able to embellish them, have an exhibit, and then have them auctioned off at the season opening event at the Kravitz Center in West Palm Beach, which is one of the greatest performing arts centers in the country, with 50% of the proceeds benefiting the symphonies, education programs, and 50% going back to the artists. These are just some of the byproducts and benefits, along with the press coverage that comes as a result of opening these, formerly closed vacant doors to create something positive in the community, and just being able to help artists, not only help the artists, but understandably on the city side and on the property side. A lot of the properties that we've been in were vacant, for years. We've been able to help get spaces leased in as quick as 3 to 6 months. On average, occupancy is going about 18 to 24 months, depending on the area that we're in. But by having the space activated, shining a positive light with the press coverage and the content, and all of the continual buzz and activation and programming and placemaking, it certainly serves a much better purpose than the space being, formerly vacant. And thankfully, you can begin to see and find examples on our website of some of the positive press coverage that we've received, that we're glad to extend to more cities and property partners as we continue to grow this program. We're currently in 3 states. These are our current locations all throughout Florida, in Richmond, Virginia, and in Natick, Massachusetts, in the luxury wing of a mall where a lot of the retailers were closing. We believe we're the first and only art studio to be in a former Burberry store located next to a Louis Vuitton, which provides obviously great opportunities for everybody. But if the luxury wing of that mall or shopping center were to lose all of its tenants, then understandably Louis Vuitton might look to move out as well. So the Natick Mall has continued to renew us actually on an annual lease basis as they work on refilling their mall. And we're glad to speak to anybody about this at any time. We certainly appreciate Rob and Rick's invitation to participate. We're big proponents and supporters of organizations like CNU. We're very active in the placemaking world and speak and attend at a lot of the conferences. And we'll be at National Main Street, America's Main Street Now conference in Philadelphia in April, if anybody would like to stop by our booth and meet us there. And certainly glad to turn it back over to Rob and answer any questions.
Yeah, like zooming out, I'm curious as to what you guys are seeing. Is the empty storefront problem, is it a growing problem? I mean, I certainly see it in, the cities and the downtowns where I go to, but I don't really have a sense as to whether this is a problem that's getting significantly worse. Since COVID, with regard to online sales, how bad is it? What are you seeing out there?
Can everybody hear my audio, by the way?
If you could speak up a little bit more, or...
Okay. I'm rarely told I'm not being loud enough, but there must be something going on here. Uh, so so first of all, yeah, I think that this is just a quick comment first. I think that what Evan and Andrew are doing is an example of when everything comes together and when things are done in a holistic way. What they're really doing is helping to address the fact that something that is very culturally important is hard to monetize. And they're helping to lower barriers to entry to that. So I think that this all ties into everything that we all are doing. I believe that I think the storefront issue is getting worse, and B, I think that it's going to get even worse in the future, and that addressing it is going to require exceptional creativity, because the nature of retail is changing, and there's a lot of a sense of, well, we'll have restaurants and food service replace that. And I think that there's a sense that restaurants and food service are going to be in some trouble as well. So I think that there's a long-term trend, as these spaces are going to be more important than ever, that it's going to require increasingly creative ways in order to activate them. And it's going to require thinking outside the box. So yes, I think the problem in general is getting worse, both in smaller towns and in larger cities. And interestingly, it's even getting worse in some places that are getting some hot spots, or that are kind of in a good trend in some ways. But they're still, I think, in a direction to have more storefront vacancies going forward.
Yeah, and I agree with Rick. I mean, certainly with regards to big box spaces that are looking to reduce their footprint, or even reduce the number of locations, that's happening across the country as well. And then when you look at the various cities that some of these big box stores are in, they're very difficult sort of to demise depending on sort of, how old the architecture is. So whether it's in Chicago or some of these older cities with much bigger buildings that have sort of one entrance into a 20,000 square foot space, how do you then divide that up into smaller spaces? So the challenges there are much greater. Obviously, I think retail is coming back quite a bit, certainly within shopping centers and other areas. So we're certainly seeing that in the market. Retail is sort of making a move back. People are starting to, come back and go back to shopping centers. But it's still not moving as quickly, and certainly within certain cities, not as quickly as they would like it to be. We certainly also do see office becoming another sort of vacancy issue. And obviously, COVID was one part of that, but a lot of people aren't coming back to the office. Obviously, with a lot of people sort of losing jobs and stuff like that too, that gets compounded as well. So we see office sort of being sort of the next sort of major vacancy issue that we're having, and we're seeing across the country, that we're sort of being approached to sort of address as well, which we've started to do in some of our iterations. So retail's come back a little bit. There's still some issues. Office seems to be sort of the major thing right now. So yeah, I mean, tons of opportunity to fill space with great things.
It's a question that I have. And you talked a lot about sort of reactivation with artists. I'm sure there's a lot of tools in the toolbox, and a lot of different situations. So where what are the places where you really you turn to artists to fill vacant storefronts, where you may not be looking, it may not be feasible to get like another kind of business in there. Is it? I mean, where do you see this most? Is it like certain places in big cities or small towns, or where the vacancy is at a certain level? Can you talk about that?
Primarily it's big cities. I mean, we like to obviously go where there is a robust art community. I think most cities do have sort of a dearth of affordable artist studio space available. And that's pretty much across the country, and some of our competition across the world as well. And the other aspect of that too is that a lot of the affordable art studio spaces in cities are run by, certainly a nonprofit that sort of supports that, but they're very heavily juried. So, the sort of the barrier of entry is really high for a lot of artists. I mean, the requirements are, whether it's an MFA or a series of exhibits. And because it's such a coveted sort of space, not everybody really gets the opportunity to go in there. So it doesn't really address the larger need of artists in various communities. So, in our model, we just sort of, once they apply, we just look at their portfolio and see that they do have an art practice, and that's pretty much it. And then it's a first come, first serve basis. But for us, it's going into communities that do have a need for affordable artist studio spaces. And what we also find, obviously, in many areas, the artists tend to go to the areas that are least expensive, which aren't the safest areas in neighborhoods, where they're not really getting sort of that built-in walk-in traffic. So as opposed to being next to a coffee shop or a bakery or anything in a main street or any of the other streets where there are neighboring tenants that could support sort of traffic. So I would say cities that are, bigger cities are better. Places that are close to universities, places that are close to places with art programs and art universities. Those are usually the areas where we'd sort of look to activate these spaces and create these opportunities for these artists.
I wanted to remind everybody, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A. We're going to get to the Q&A shortly. I kind of wanted to ask about what is the end goal? If you're looking to have artists fill vacant storefronts or vacant retail spaces, is there an end goal that's beyond that to sort of get to self-sustaining downtown, or what are you looking to get in the long run out of that?
I think for us, we feel that there is really very little reason for space to be vacant for a long time. It could certainly be used by people in the community for a myriad of reasons. Obviously we're tackling it from an art studio standpoint because that creates a really great sort of activation opportunity, an opportunity for artists that don't have lots of opportunities. We've seen these spaces then become sort of hubs for the community to gather. And because of the equitable nature of the business model where, everybody pays the same rate, whether you're, the first person in or whether you're in the front space or the back space. So it really sort of crosses a lot of areas where regardless of whether you're from a wealthy area or a low income neighborhood, you can still all afford the space and you're still all sort of under the umbrella of art. So it becomes a place where the community sort of gathers to be able to have conversations that they may not have because people might not cross paths in the same area just because they may live in another location. So I think it becomes something of a catalyst to sort of breed more activity in neighborhoods. We always say closed doors generate positive press. So it's either no press or bad press. A lot of places that are closed, it creates opportunities for the in-house to kind of hang out outside and those kind of things. But the space now being active very easily with us being in the space, now you have this active space with activity that breeds more activity. It provides opportunities for property owners to not just get eyeballs on a location for bad press, but get eyeballs on a location for very positive press with that property owner then collaborating with us and the local artists in the community to be able to activate that space. So I would say, primarily it's a catalyst for more activity. It's a catalyst for more activation. It's also a catalyst for more development and economic development within communities and cities.
We're going to get to some Q&A from the audience. Elizabeth asks, Evan, how much renovation to the space do you do? How do local galleries react to your concept? I'm asking specifically about galleries that are kind of like co-ops.
We do help bring spaces up to code. We do improve lighting. We do add signage. Obviously, we're filling the space with art to add to the life, color, and vibrancy. Most local galleries in shopping centers and areas where we have activated have appreciated the concept, because it's bringing more traffic and eyeballs to that area. We like to believe rising tides raise all ships. So it's more complementary than competitive, though we can't control how certain people feel about it, but that's been the general response. And generally, obviously, as anybody's ever been to a vacant space that's dark, even if it's blighted or not blighted, it's just not present to look at. So by having it, as you saw in some of the visuals, filled with not only the artwork, but whatever also the artists bring in to activate the space, then it certainly makes it more appealing for the neighboring tenant, the walkability of the community. And we've received nothing but positive feedback and interest in collaborating, and do collaborate with a lot of co-op galleries, arts organizations, other arts nonprofits. And it is more complementary than it is competitive.
And I'd say too, I guess the differential between what we do and sort of a traditional gallery is that these are primarily working artist studios. Yes, the artist could sell in a space without any commission to us, but they're primarily working artist studios as opposed to just co-working display areas. So there is activity there. So the chances of maybe even artists that displays in a cohabitation gallery could still operate within our space as a creation space. So that is our primary goal, is to create these creation or working artist studios in these environments and in these cities.
Dwayne asks, how do you ensure that your activation efforts don't inadvertently contribute to gentrification or displacement, particularly in historically underserved neighborhoods? And what safeguards do you put in place to prioritize long-term community benefit over short-term economic gains?
You've asked, that's the hardest question you could ask, right? Because there's not necessarily a perfect answer to that, because we're seeing so much gentrification in so many places. What I think that one of the ways to help address it, so I'm about to be starting work in a community in Fort Worth that has a very strong sort of historic character, and that is surrounded by two neighborhoods that are about to experience, just an avalanche of gentrification. And I think two ways to look at it. One is lower the barrier to entry so that people can, so that no matter who somebody is, that they can have a business there. So that you don't have to be a national credit tenant with a 10-year lease. If we have to break up the spaces, if we have to do other things that might make it easier to bring a business in there. And I think another thing is that gentrification isn't only about money, but it's also about culture. So make sure that you're leaving signs of the culture that are there. There's other ways to do it. There's certainly ways, for example, to help make sure that people who may be living in the neighborhood, that they have a lot of different housing options, or that they have, help to make sure that they can minimize their property taxes. There are things like that that can be done, but I think making sure that people can, at least the people who are there, can invest in their own places, and have the support that they need to be small business owners and small developers, is one way to address that question from my perspective. But I wish I knew a magic wand, because I think it's a difficult issue.
And
As a follow-up, okay, go ahead, Andrew.
no, I would say also too, we're just also getting ready to sort of launch a campaign into areas that have been sort of gentrified, in ways to sort of bring artists back to these communities. So a lot of mixed use development, a lot of times the ground floor retail does stay vacant for quite a bit of time, because the majority of the income that's generated out of these spaces is focused on the apartments that they're trying to rent, and not so much the retail floors. So what we're doing is trying to go back to developers and say, hey, listen, you've come to this community, you've sort of, done some development. Well, now with your ground floor retail that's there vacant, we want to be able to then repopulate that with the artists that were in the community before, with this, concept that's temporary until you find that permanent tenant. And then to also address some sort of additional permanency, we've recently launched a nonprofit called Space of Possibility, whose goal is to acquire space to make permanent space available for artist studios and potentially live workspaces for artists. So we are sort of mindful of the aspect of the temporary space, being also difficult for artists, but we also see opportunities in developers coming into communities that do gentrify it quite a bit, to be able to then offer that space to artists at their ground floor, to be able to repopulate it with those artists on a temporary basis. And what a lot of property owners have done is, as space gets occupied, so say we get a 30-day notice to vacate, they usually move us into the next available space that they have on their property. So that could continue for quite some time, but we are looking to acquire permanent space to then be able to have a permanent location for artists to move in and stay in these communities as well.
And lastly, by going into a shopping center or a mall or an office building versus the traditional industrial warehouse district where the rent is generally cheap, where the developers end up developing, nobody's knocking down, tomorrow most malls or shopping centers or office buildings to build condos, and we are understanding even office to residential conversions, it's not a quick and easy process. So that's one way that we're mitigating it versus the traditional just go where the rent is cheap. And then those are the areas that unfortunately do get gentrified.
One follow-up to Rick. I mean, how do you lower the barrier to entry? It seems like that is the the rent for the going rental rate is determining the barrier to entry in these downtowns or main streets. Is that not true? And how do you address that?
I mean, there's ways to do it, but the first way to lower the barrier to entry is to take larger spaces and see how that you can subdivide them into smaller spaces, which allows people to have shorter leases and smaller leases. So one example that I've worked on that's well known in some new urbanist circles is in the inner ring suburb of DeSoto, Texas, and this is an old strip shopping center. It was an Ace Hardware, and now it is a small business, we might say incubator or accelerator, but they have 7 micro restaurants and a lot of small retailers and a lot of small offices. So somebody can come in here for a year and try an idea out and get some guidance, so that they're not necessarily saying we have to take out a 5-10 year lease, which is not feasible for most people who are just starting out their businesses. There's other ways that you can target things. For example, you can have targeted tax incentives if there's certain type of businesses that you want that might help to lower the rent a little bit. And there's different ways that you can provide business support that walk people through. If a certain district, you're working closely with the Chamber of Commerce and the Small Business Development Center to hold people's hand through the process. The idea is that if we want national chain formula businesses to dominate our places, we should keep doing what we're doing. But if we want to have unique local businesses, figure out a way to say, okay, these people are not going to be able to they might have great clothing that they sell, but they're not going to be able to take out a 10-year lease and have all the expenses. But maybe we can break it down into something smaller for them. And that's one of the guiding principles, I think, of all of this, is that the places that are special, you're going to have to figure out different ways to accommodate them if you want them to be in your communities.
Ty asks, I appreciate Evan's program and approach, and it sparks a lot of creative thought. I'm curious about how it may play in a more disinvested area that has a burgeoning artist community, but not necessarily the patron potential of a Palm Beach or a Boca Raton. Are there case examples for this in places that are less resourced?
Andrew?
No, I mean, I think some of the issue there is that not necessarily being able to provide the space for the artist to work out of, but more so of the need or the want of many artists to be able to do sales. And so obviously you need that collector sort of buyer to be able to be there to obviously facilitate the artists being able to do sales. But what we have found though is that in many of our locations we also allow the artists to do classes, right? So you may have an artist that may not be doing robust sales but could conduct art classes for groups, whether it's senior centers or whether it's young people or anyone that's from a group standpoint that's interested in learning how to do various things, painting, drawing, and all these different things. A lot of these things also do get facilitated through those spaces, and then that also becomes a way to sort of offset income. We have a fair amount of artists that they may not be doing robust art sales, but they do robust classes that provide some great opportunities there. So I think that's one way that getting into smaller communities without that really big collector community there could also be sufficient or could be self-sustaining with this kind of model. And I think also too, I think the appreciation of art changes as well when someone actually sees an art piece going from a blank canvas to a finished piece. A lot of the times, most of us that buy work, you're either buying it from a gallery or your interior designer essentially, essentially selected for your home. But a lot of people don't really get to meet the artist or get to have the convo with the artist. I think we just got a video from someone that visited one of our spaces in a mall, and there's an artist there that's come from the legacy of the Highwaymen, which is a popular group of guys that were painting sort of Florida scenes over several years. And he's sort of part of that legacy. And the guy he's a filmmaker, came into the space, actually did a video of this guy that was doing this work. And he's, really prolific in the terms of the work that he produces. So I think the appreciation for art changes quite a bit, or in that same scenario, there's a nail salon across the way from that space. And we get stories of people like, hey, I was in a nail salon today and I saw this guy painting and getting commissions, and that guy getting commissions just because someone was at a neighboring business, was able to see this guy creating work. And then by seeing that guy creating work, their appreciation for the work was there, but then also that spurred on purchases. But that wasn't the reason that they went to the space. They went to the nail salon, and then that space happened to be there and they happened to see the process happening. So I think as just the general public is exposed to the creation of art, the appreciation for it and the interest in purchasing it then starts to blossom. So when you look at communities that don't really have that robust collector community, I think having working artist studios there where people could see art being created could help make that community a little more in tune with and supportive of the artists and artists that are in that community as well.
We had a question from Duncan in my area, which is San Francisco Bay. Every new residential project has most of the ground floor built out for potential retail, but it's all mostly remaining vacant even years later. This may have to do with codes, but do you have any thoughts or suggestions on how to deal with that?
So, what we're realizing, a lot of that is most of the time, developers are sort of mandated to have ground floor retail as they go develop in communities across the country. And a lot of developers, based on sort of the vast majority of their income coming from the apartments that they're trying to sell, they don't really even put in ground floor necessarily in their pro formas sometimes. So the focus is really on the apartments, and then as they get interest for ground floor retail, that starts coming in later on. So we've started chatting with a lot of developers and coming in from the beginning of when they're going to develop, and us coming in as a partner. And we've done that with some mixed use development where developers have had their ground floor retail vacant. They want to focus on the apartments. We come in as that first tenant into that space, and then we start building sort of the vibe and the whole vibe for that area with artists occupying these spaces. And then that, I think, could be a really great solution. So we don't necessarily have to come into a chronic vacancy. We can come into a brand new vacancy that's got a vanilla box and come in there to occupy that space. So with those sort of situations, and with the more that we're starting to know about it, I think there's more opportunity for us to then be introduced to a lot of these developers and present us coming into these spaces on this temporary basis with this proven model to be able to activate that and also help out the community. I think in a lot of areas too, there are properties that developers purchase and they just kind of hold on to while they're waiting to develop. That's also another way for us to come into these spaces and occupy them on that temporary basis until they're ready to develop as well. So there's a lot of ways that I think we could kind of work with various iterations of empty space. But I think in a sense that we come in with sort of a package or a turnkey opportunity for developers and property owners to be able to support the local community and have activity there that benefits both them and that community. There's a whole bunch of reasons why, again, spaces should not be vacant. There should always be some sort of activity there because the possibilities are just endless.
And we know San Francisco is in a unique situation, and we did visit Union Square last year and are familiar with the Vacant to Vibrant program that the SF New Deal is operating. And it's a great initiative, but it could only serve so many communities. So even just advocating for alternative uses and activations reaching out to your local stakeholder. If you happen to know the developer, the property owner, or even the local ULI chapter, the economic development office, somebody in the mayor's office, and say, hey, I see Vacant to Vibrant is doing, activations in certain neighborhoods. I think this zero empty spaces solution could supplement those efforts, which we have spoken to their office about doing, because they're obviously funded by the mayor's office, and there's only so much funding to go around for this. But there's so many artists in San Francisco. We also understand the price per square foot is what is still enormous, even from the pre-COVID rates. So while it's sitting vacant, waiting for that $100, $200, $300, $400 per square foot tenant to come back, how about we have it, serve a positive purpose for the community where there is no shortage of artists in San Francisco Bay Area.
Mm. The only thing I would add to that is that some of the best kind of what we might call third places that I know are kind of storefronts that or retail spaces or commercial spaces that are connected with a larger development that are kind of lost leaders, or they're just not taking as much rent as they would need to because they want to create an amenity for people. So I think globally that could be sold as an opportunity for maybe people who have ground floor retail that might not be really necessary.
We're getting a lot of questions. I mean, similar questions, really. A town has adopted a form-based code, and you're getting a mix of uses in the transect zones, but the empty commercial seeing empty commercial buildings request residential upfits. The concern that we're losing our commercial building stock. How should we balance the town's desire for commercial in our future downtown and push for residential and the push for residential that we see from developers, all the while keeping buildings occupied? I mean, it's a balancing act. Is there, any solution to this?
I think in one sense we're great. For what we do, we're great fillers of space, right? So, as I guess cities are trying to figure out, what they're going to convert to residential, how much commercial are they still going to keep to be able to facilitate opportunities. I think, as Rick had mentioned too, that barrier of entry being very high. So say I decided that, I want to open up my own clothing store. I'm a designer and I'm making, upcycle clothes, and I want to open up my own brick and mortar store. Maybe I'm selling online, maybe I'm selling at Etsy, but the only spaces that may be available at a small scale are 1,500 square feet. And, looking at like that how much capital that you need to sort of build out a 1,500 square foot space, electricity, permits, all these different things, having a space that's divided into smaller spaces where maybe your space is 100 square feet or 200 square feet does reduce that, money required or that capital required to go into a space like that. So I think, being able to figure out a way, and even if it's not with us, getting a group of people together and coming in and going into spaces and dividing that bigger space into smaller spaces is a very, very viable way to sort of build capacity and build opportunities for people in these local communities. All of our spaces are all artists managed, so we're not necessarily there with a manager in these locations. They're all artist managed, and we use some technology to be able to sort of manage the space from afar, but they're primarily managed by the local artists. So I think collectively groups of people could take space and divide that space among themselves to be able to open up business and to make some of these commercial spaces still viable, even as developers want to create residential and so on and so forth.
Well, we are now at the hour, and we're pretty much done with the Q&A. So I think we can wrap it up. But as a final question, I just wanted to ask, if you had any final thoughts. What are the biggest problems that you see that can be addressed by your approach to storefronts or artists, or If you could, Rick, if you could start.
Sure. I mean, I think connected to what everybody is saying, you're going to have to pick battles because we've long been over retailed in this country, and now we're even more over retailed. So you have to pick where is really important to you, or where is really the lowest hanging fruit. And the approach that I'm suggesting, um, and that we use, is very flexible. So if there's a way that you can get a grand slam, that's wonderful. But if you know the next steps are just make your storefronts look a little better, or maybe we've got a space or two we can occupy, just take that flexible approach, take what wins that you can, and just look at it as simply and as systematically as possible, for how to take the next step. And if you go to our the website at storefrontleague.com, it's a pretty simple website, but we have a form that you can fill out, if you have questions or ideas or thoughts, as well, about how to take the next step. But I think this really combines everything that we've been doing, which is about what are the next 20 or 30 things you can do with resources you actually have, and how do you start getting results, whether it's big results or modest results, how do you get them in the next month or the next 2 months? That's really what the approach focuses on, and what we encourage, the way that we encourage cities and consultants and so forth to think.
Okay. Evan, Andrew, any final words?
Evan, you want to say something?
I mean, as Andrew mentioned, we don't see any need to have vacant spaces in any community, and we don't see the need for property owners to have to pay fines and increase taxes as a result of some of the ordinances that some of the questions were referring to. You know, and we're able to provide other ideas, resources beyond the art studios. We're working on maker spaces. We're working on spaces for makers and people that are on Etsy that make the handmade candles and honey and soap and jewelry to be able to sell their goods. We're working on live work spaces. We're working on taking former restaurant spaces and making commissary kitchens for caterers and chefs and people that have food trucks and make goods at home to be able to sell. It really just takes people changing the way that they view and interact with empty space, which I give Rob and CNU a lot of credit for taking the time and the initiative and the platform to inspire people to do so. And then literally just having the conversation instead of, you know, a lot of people understandably will turn their head, look the other way, hope things will get better. And that's not really helping anybody. And, you know, we can't be everything to everyone, but with the partnership with the Storefront Renaissance League, with our partnerships with National Main Street America, and with other synergistic placemaking organizations, we're glad to share these resources, you know, provide advisory remotely, and share some of our, you know, learning lessons and frameworks and takeaways that communities of any size can apply. If it's a small, rural, or, you know, large major metro area, you know, there's no need to have vacant space in 2025.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you very much. It's been a great discussion, and really appreciate your insights, Evan, Andrew, Rick, and thanks everybody for joining us today. And we'll see you again.
Appreciate your time. Thanks for having us.
Okay.
Thank you,
Take
everybody.
care.
Really appreciate it.
Bye.